I'm Christina Weston from Wave Northern Beaches. I'm here today with Annie Gurton, couples therapist, also from the Northern Beaches. And we're going to be talking about how to survive being 24/7 with your partner during the coronavirus lockdown period. We're going to take a look at a bunch of strategies that'll help you get through. Thanks for joining us, Annie. What are you noticing?
Well, I'm seeing couples who are really going a bit stir crazy. I'm seeing some who are really finding it very challenging being with their loved one with such intensity. Because normally one or other or both are at work, and work is a sort of circuit breaker in a relationship. And going apart from each other during the day, it can be really healthy. So being forced to spend a lot of intense time together can bring a lot of stuff up. So that's what I'm seeing mainly.
Okay, wonderful. So what we're going to talk through today is a series of practical tips that are going to be really grounding for couples to help them survive this difficult time. So let's get right into it.
When couples come in to see me and they say that normally they never argue, honestly, my heart drops. I think, oh no, because this couple really hasn't quite got it. Because the fact of the matter is that arguing, I don't like to call them fights really, it's a bit extreme, but arguing and conflict is really normal. We call it growth trying to happen or growth happening. Because when a couple is in conflict and something is going on, there's heat, there's dispute, there's words, and stuff comes up and it usually gets resolved. And what makes a difference, what separates a good couple, if you like, from a bad couple, is the couples who know how to argue well, the couples who know the boundaries, they know to give the other one time to hear their point of view, and they know how that eventually things will settle down and it will be resolved. Whereas a bad couple kind of hates the process, really dislikes arguing. It makes them both, one or both, feel really uncomfortable, and they're just not at peace with it. And a lot of people are like that. A lot of people are conflict averse, don't like the process, but believe me, it's really healthy to do.
So an argument has started,
Right.
and how do we deal with it?
Okay, so I think it's really helpful when a couple is sort of trapped, if you like, in a small space to have defined areas within that space. So, for example, the kitchen might be his space where he goes to and he feels safe. The bedroom or a bathroom or a balcony might be her space. So it's for them to negotiate. But if they decide that if one or other of them goes to their predefined safe space, they won't be accosted there, the argument won't continue there. They can call time out and they can go to that space and kind of recover and things can calm down.
And the objective there is that they're not interrupted. So that's their time.
The objective is that they're not interrupted, but it's also that things can calm down. In arguments, one of the greatest tools, if you like, is time, and just giving each other time to process what's being said and time to calm down. The Victorians used to talk about their advice to a newly married couple was never go to sleep on an argument. And that's really outdated these days, because quite often going back to an argument next day is the way to go, because things are calmer, you've had time to process it, you've slept on it, you can see the other one's point of view. So we don't recommend couples try and sort it all out in one day. Coming back to it the next day is a really good idea.
So when couples are arguing, it's really important for them to step back and see the other's point of view. Talk us through that, Annie.
Well, metaphorically and practically step back, yes. Actually separate themselves for a little bit, go to their safe space, and then come back when things are a little calmer. We talk in Imago, I use a process called Imago, which is a way of approaching couples and relationships. And in Imago, we talk about the bridge. And the bridge is a metaphorical space between the couples, a bridge wide enough so that they can pass into each other's world. And we ask that one to be the host for the other one to come into their world and be kind to them in that space. So in arguments, it's really important that they're able to cross the bridge and see the other person's point of view. It's a really hard thing to do when the things are heated, but it's a really important thing to do as well.
Yes, I think it's really one of the things that is challenging is not to interrupt.
Incredibly difficult to do. Not interrupting is an incredibly difficult thing to do because we have things we want to say. It's really important that we have the last word, that we are heard. So in the imago process, we ask that they take turns to listen to each other. And in taking turns, they wait until the other one has completely finished all that they need to say before they start their own part of the argument. And as part of that, we ask them to mirror each other. So one will start talking and the other one will listen and mirror back what they're hearing. The first one talks some more, the second one listens and mirrors. And that process goes on until the first one has completely finished saying all that they need to say. And then they swap and the other one has a turn at saying all they want to say.
So when you say mirroring, do you mean repeating back? So it might be, what I've heard you say, Annie, is...
Yes, absolutely. What I've heard you say, or just a few words of what they've said. Ideally, they'd repeat back the whole sentence or the whole bit that they've heard. But if they can just repeat a few words of what they heard, that's helpful. But when the speaker hears their words come back to them, they know they've been heard. And maybe they've been heard inaccurately, so they have an opportunity to put it right.
So it's like when you leave the dishes unwashed in the sink, it really infuriates me.
Yes. Well, if you were to say that to me, I would reverse the pronoun. So I'd say, so what I'm hearing you say is that when I leave the dishes in the sink, it really infuriates you. Yes, exactly. And then I say, and is there more? And you would perhaps reply,
yes, there is more. When you leave your clothes all over the place and I have to clean up after you, it really infuriates me.
So when I leave my clothes all over the place, it really infuriates you and you have to clear up after me. Is there more?
Okay, so you just keep that going until there's no more to say.
You keep that going until there's no more to say, and then you switch. So I become the one to say, it really infuriates me when you leave your empty coffee cups by the sink and don't put them in the dishwasher. And you would mirror that back.
All these little arguments, are they often a sign of something deeper?
Couple has an argument. What's actually happening? It's not about who squeezes the toothpaste tube in the middle or who puts the rubbish out. What's actually happening is that childhood stuff is coming up. So in the first stage of a relationship, we call it the romantic phase, which lasts anything from a few weeks to 2 or 3 years. Everything's wonderful, lovey-dovey. They overlook any imperfections or irritations and everything's sweet. But as they move into the next phase, it's called the power struggle, stuff emerges. This is when the arguments start coming up. And it does feel as though there's a kind of tussle going on for power in the relationship. And both of them want to be the powerful one. But what is actually going on is something much deeper, and it's all to do with how they were wounded as children. And that sounds quite dramatic, being wounded as a child, but in fact, no one survives childhood unwounded. Even those with the most perfect childhoods, stuff happens to us all. And we carry those wounds, we'll call them, into our adulthood. And then we meet our permanent partner, our soulmate, or whatever you want to call them. And in that relationship, these early childhood wounds come up because the relationship is safe. And so we allow these woundings to emerge, and they emerge in the form of arguments.
So let's talk about fighting fair.
Okay, so when we're having an argument, it's very important not to get nasty, because nasty words linger. Nastiness will hang in the air. So we really encourage couples to kind of keep a monitor, keep a check on the actual words that are coming out of their mouths. It's important not to be critical. It's important not to blame someone. It's important not to shame someone, and not being mean and spiteful. So if you feel yourself beginning to go towards that edge of an argument, try and pull yourself back so that the words are rational they're not too emotional, and they're not using phrases like "you always" or "you must" or these sort of big words. Try and keep it logical, if you like. And I know it's hard to do when the heat of an argument.
Yes, I was just going to say, in the heat of an argument, before you know it, the words have come out. So how can you check yourself, because they're already there and you can't take them back?
It takes time to learn to do this. It does take time, but there's nothing wrong with stepping back from an argument. I think a lot of people think that the argument's got to be done then and there, and it's got to be resolved. And one party might really try and push for that. But if they can try and separate themselves, go to their safe space in a different part of the apartment, and just try and calm down, allow time to soothe things down and calm down. It is very difficult to stop in the heat of an argument from that impetus to say all that you need to say right then and there. It's a learned process. It doesn't come easily.
So Annie, let's talk about the importance of time out.
Yes, I encourage all my couples to actually use the symbol that you see in, is it basketball? They use the timeout sign, and to respect that. So when one of them sees the other one do that, it's very important that that sign is respected and they both move away, go to separate places and just calm down. Sometimes I encourage them to use a kind of code word. So one that I use with my couples a lot is there's pink flamingos on the lawn. So if it won't matter so much now when it's just the two of them in an apartment, but if they're at a dinner party, for example, something comes up and the heat of the argument begins to rise, one or other can say there's pink flamingos, something about flamingos. No one else will know what they're talking about, but they will know, okay, I've registered, there's something going on here for you, we'll talk about it later, we'll come back to it later. So having a code word when there's other people around is really important, especially children, because it is, of course, important that parents don't argue in front of their children. Children, of course, are looking to their parents to model perfect adult relationships. So when parents argue in front of the children, several things are happening. None of them are good. First of all is that they're creating a sense of lack of safety and uncertainty. And for kids, that is really scary. Okay, that is the sort of wounding that we talk about. So when a child finds himself in the middle of an adult row or overhearing an adult row, they find that very alarming, very upsetting. And I implore all parents never to argue within sight or sound of the children. And the other reason is that they are modeling adult relationships. So the children look at mum and dad and the affection that they show each other and the respect that they show each other for learning how to be in their own adult relationships.
So it models their language of love.
Absolutely, models the language of love, yeah, and the behaviors.
So some children might start to associate anger and outbursts as what love is.
Well, yes, that's why some people get involved with toxic and abusive relationships. If they themselves have come from a family where there was a lot of physical violence, that's what they will look for as a familiarity, as a familiar thing in their own adult relationships. That's true. So they're not going to work anymore. And the day just becomes very drifty and dreamlike, unstructured. It can become very unstructured. And they can actually have a lot of time on their hands doing nothing, which can disintegrate into acrimony. So it's really helpful if they create a routine. So they still get up and get dressed properly, have breakfast together, and then separate. I really recommend that they separate as though they were going to work and go to separate parts of the apartment. And if they have work to do, because I know a lot of people are working from home, if they're working to do, that needs to be respected. So the other one doesn't interrupt that at all. They might come together for lunch and then separate again in the afternoon. So having a daily routine like that, which actually resembles their work day, is really helpful. And then in the evening, they can do something together. They might want to watch a movie or have a virtual dinner party with friends. I've heard of people doing that using online technology so that you have several people eating a meal at the same time and having a chat over the table, and watching movies together, playing games together. I myself am part of a card group, and we've been playing cards online. And we still have nibbles and a glass of wine at the same time. So that sort of thing in the evening, as in a normal day. So the daytime is kept more for separate activities, and the evening for more relationship activities. So one of the dangers of sort of being locked up with your loved one is that you become so familiar with each other that you almost become like siblings. And romance can drop away, because what romance needs is surprise. What keeps romance alive is having surprises and being surprised. That is the key to having keeping a romantic relationship alive. So bringing surprises when you're with the same person all day and not having the opportunity to go out to the flower shop or anything like that can be tricky. So people need to use their imagination as to how to keep the romance up. There's also, of course, the opportunity to be physically romantic in the evenings and cuddle and kiss and all that sort of thing. But sometimes people have to actually stop and make themselves do it. It often doesn't come as spontaneously when there's a lot of familiarity, so they have to work at that. So when couples that come into my therapy room and they say that the romance has gone out of their relationship, one thing that I often ask them is, so what was the romance like in the early days? And I ask them to describe to me what the other one used to do that helped them fall in love with each other. And they'll talk about, oh, he used to leave me little notes in my work bag, and or she used to do this little thing and that little thing, surprises basically. And these little romantic things, bringing home a bunch of flowers, a surprise. All these little things were the things that they did in the early days, and I really suggest that they pick up on those same things later in the relationship. But of course, later in the relationship, they need to be worked at that much harder. It does become hard work. Relationships are hard work, but it's so worth it. It's really important that the couples continue to respect each other. And one of the key things that can get lost is empathy, especially when there's a lot of arguing, a lot of conflict is coming up. People tend to look inwards and forget that the other person has a point of view. They have needs and rights as well. So when we talk about crossing the bridge into the other one's world, we also talk about crossing the bridge and feeling how the other one is feeling, thinking what's going on for the other one, putting yourself into the other one's shoes and trying to see the dispute from their point of view. It's incredibly helpful, but it's very difficult to do again, especially in the heat of the moment. So this is a sort of thing that often couples, one reason we suggest that couples don't try and resolve it the same day, come back to it next day, is that overnight empathy can grow. So giving the argument time, giving the conflict time to take the heat out of it and imagine how the other one is feeling is really important. One thing I tell my couples is that, it's a lovely phrase, you can be right or you can be in a relationship. And the idea is that there are times when you need to know when to step down. There are times when you need to let the other one appear to be the winner, feel that they've won, get their point of view across, and you don't necessarily need to have them hear all that you want to say at that moment. So being able to pick your fights, pick your moments, let things go when it's not really important. Think about losing the battle but winning the war, that sort of thing. Being able to see the bigger picture is really important. Sometimes I suggest people imagine they're in a helicopter and they sort of pull back from the situation, see themselves in this argument down there, and remember that in the bigger picture, in the bigger context, that's a very small moment in time. And there will be lots of times in the future when they can be heard more about what it is they want to say. So it is a lot to remember, and in the heat of the moment, it's very difficult to stop and think of all this stuff. We do get very carried away. It's a lot of internal pressure to say what you need to say, and people do find themselves shouting and ranting and raging. So learning how to do this takes time. And there is a course that I produced with Rescue Academy called Reignite Your Relationship. And in that, there are actors actually demonstrating how to do the Imago dialogue and how to carry out a good dispute, a good argument, how to resolve an argument in a controlled and caring way. So I would recommend that people have a look for that. I think you're going to put a link on your site to that. It's $99 and it's well worth it, because it does explain it all in a lot more detail, and you can actually see people doing it. It's a good way to train yourself. With a couple that can't manage their arguments very well, couples are in a lot of conflict, who come away feeling very confused, very aroused, and with nothing really resolved. What's happening there is that the communication skills that they have are insufficient, not good. Unfortunately, we're not taught this sort of stuff at school, and we really should be. And in fact, in America, they are beginning to do that. In the city of Dallas, all the schools teach their children how to have safe conversations with each other. So learning how to have an argument is a life skill that everyone should know. But if a couple is arguing a lot, I would suggest there's a lot of stuff that's coming up, and they could do with some professional help and guidance. And my couples often come for 5 or 6 sessions, and then they may come back in 6 months' time for a bit of top up. It's about working with me to learn how to navigate all the ups and downs of a relationship. And conflict is part of a relationship. It's healthy. So don't be alarmed if you are having lots of arguments and petty niggles with your loved one. It's a healthy sign. The trick is to know how to navigate that, and I'm here to help.
So it's often been said, Annie, that if you're challenged in relationships and you're constantly arguing, that you need to start looking at yourself and doing work on yourself before you're ready to be truly in relationship with another. The work starts here. What's your response?
Well, that's an old viewpoint. It's not the way we look at things these days. We see the relationship as the therapy. Being in a good relationship with someone is being in excellent therapy, and each couple, each individual in the couple is each other's therapist. Okay, so it's a curious thing, but what we've worked out, because relationships are now a science and they're no mystery anymore, what we know now is that people are attracted to someone who is wounded at the same stage of their development. So someone who was wounded at early old attachment stage will be with someone who was also wounded at that stage, but has the opposite adaptation, the opposite way of dealing with it. So someone who runs away and hides when things get scary will marry someone who comes forward and who wants to sort it all out right in that moment. There's 4 or 5 different stages of development, going through from infancy and attachment stage, through identity and competence. And we each meet and fall in love with someone who is wounded at the same developmental stage. It's in the books. There's a very good book called Getting the Love You Want, which explains it all. So what emerges in a couple is that they are trying to resolve their own stuff, and also are confronted by another person who is wounded at a similar stage. So one thing that happens a lot in couples is that one or other or both might do what we call taking an exit. Exits are things like addictions, using technology too much, exercise, being a workaholic. Anything that takes them away from the relationship is an exit. And to some extent, most of us do that a lot of the time. We might go out and exercise, or go and swim, or love going to work, because it actually takes us away. It's a circuit breaker from the relationship. So When that exit becomes problematic in the relationship, that's something we need to address. So if someone is using alcohol to escape as an exit, then we need to look at that. Addictions are really hard to deal with because they provide such a complete escape from the relationship, but nothing is impossible to work with. So that's the sort of thing that I work with a lot. Did that answer your question?
No, it did. It did. Because I think that's, there's a lot of people that say, oh, you need to, spend time understanding yourself and knowing yourself. But often what relationships will do is they'll bring up the things that you need to look at anyway, because they're triggers that create an opportunity for you to work out, well, why is that triggering me? And you get to do the work on yourself in relationship.
But it's very hard to look at yourself. It's extremely hard. You might know that you have a certain behavior, but it's almost impossible for us on our own to work on that on our own. We need our partner to help us through that. So that's why the relationship is so powerful as a way of growing out of all that wounding and healing all that wounding that we experienced early on. That's why a therapist can be so useful, because they provide a third pair of eyes on the relationship. So the space that I create for clients in my therapy room and online is safe and it's calm. And so we can spend time to slow things really down and look at what's actually going on underneath. And so through me, they can come to understand themselves and their relationship far better. So I've mentioned that relationships start with a romantic phase, and then they inevitably always go into a power struggled phase, which is when all the conflicts and the disputes come out and come up and get resolved. And then, happily, we move into the deep love phase. And sooner or later, most couples reach a stage where things are much calmer. They can talk about things much more sweetly. They're much more kind to each other. They just mature, really. So it's really nice to know that even though there may be conflict going on now, if they stick with it and work it out, later what they're looking forward to is a much deeper love, a much more connected space where communication is easy and the love flows very sweetly.
So Annie, there is a happily ever after.
Most definitely, if they stick with it. I mean, some couples shouldn't be together. Some couples really, that they're only in the therapy room because they feel they need to go through that process, and one or other of them is already halfway out the door, or they really are deeply incompatible, or there's violence. If there's a lot of violence, I really don't recommend couples stick with it. Domestic abuse is very unpleasant and highly damaging. Shouldn't be around at all. But for most couples, 95% of my couples, however hard it may look, however hard it may feel, however incompatible they may think they are, they may think they're very unsuited, but actually most of the time they are perfect for each other. And it just needs a bit of professional advice to tweak things a little bit to get them back on track.
Thank you so much, Annie. It's an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure as well. Nice to work with you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
We hope this has given you some tips and tools and insights into how you can survive this coronavirus period and beyond. Thank you so much.